just sank. And I get it. I get it. It used to bother me when my mother would give Peter and me chores. Peter just sank. But Jesus moves on from Bethany. And for the next several weeks, we're going to follow him as he moves toward Jerusalem and Calvary. But today we find him in Luke chapter 12, deeper in it. Chapter 12, verses 13 and forward for a little bit, where it says, "Then one from the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' But Jesus said to him, 'Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?' And he said to them, 'Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses.' And then he spoke a parable to them, saying, 'The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?' So he said, I'll do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
If you pick up almost anything on the shelf at the grocery and look at it, there is going to be a sticker of some sign warning you about something. Because of the litigious society that we live in, everybody's looking for a quick buck. And as I looked over things for my message this morning, I found a whole number of sayings that are, some of them pretty clever, on things that have happened on warning labels. One of them is on a bottle of Ambien, sleeping pills. And it says, "Warning, may cause drowsiness." Good. One of them was on a fishing lure, that had 3 or 4 hooks on it, Mark. And it says, "Warning, not to be taken internally." Makes sense to me. Well, Jesus issued warnings too. And in Matthew 6, he says these words, "Be careful about worshiping for show," the Pharisees. And in Matthew 18, he says, "See that you don't look down on the little ones." And here today in Luke chapter 12, Jesus begins his parable of the foolish farmer with these words. Hear the words. "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And that's what I want us to think about just for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I promise that's all it's going to be today. We need to think, when does our stuff, when do our possessions begin to define who we are? Now, all of us, we need to have a communal confession at this time. Every one of us. Because to every one of us, possessions have an allure. They have an appeal. It's like the sirens calling us. And we want stuff. We like it. We buy stuff. And then we buy more stuff. And the fun of shopping has become just somewhat of a way of life. And possessions give us a feeling of status. In verse 16 we read, "And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop." Now, if you think, I want you to remember Tevye in that wonderful musical, Fiddler on the Roof, going back into the mid-1900s. Great thing. And Tevye was a wonderful farmer, and he was talking to the Lord about the declining society that he was in and about the changing conditions all around him there in Russia. And you're familiar with that time. You know things were not good. And Tevye says to God, I realize that it's no shame to be poor, but God, it's no honor either. So God, would it have been so terrible if I were a very rich man? I remember so well many years ago, and I don't know how many, right downstairs in Fellowship Hall, a music program that the Best Little Choir in Memphis put on. And in that program, John Marshall was all dolled up like Tevye. Ashley Russell sat on the piano with her violin. She didn't play it. She just sat there and looked like she could play it, but she did know how. And John did a bang-up job of If I Were a Rich Man. Listen to the words, because they're very, very relevant to what I'm talking about today. If I were a rich man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. There would be one long staircase going up, there would be one long staircase going down, and there would be one long staircase going nowhere, just for show. If I were a rich man, there would be chickens and turkeys and geese and ducks in the yard, and everybody who passed that way would say, here lives a wealthy man. Well, my surmise is there's a little bit of Tevye in every one of us. I know there's a little bit of Tevye in me. Now, the chickens and ducks may have changed to Mercedes and lake houses, but we like stuff, and we like to collect it. And I can justify it, and I've heard other people justify it by saying, oh, I'm doing my best to keep the economy rolling right along. That works. Well, and then there's a second thing, that stuff, possessions, have the look and the appeal of success. And with more grain, and with bigger barns in which to store it, it's obvious that the smart farmer was honest. He was hardworking. He was industrious. So that raises the question, is it wrong to be rich? And I find that answer to be no. It is not wrong to be rich. And I think perhaps the church needs to turn from, the other word for that is to repent, from its prejudice against rich people, because they spout their prejudice against rich people. But you know what? When that plate is passed and the money is dropped in, they use that money to fund all the things that they do, their good deeds. And that smacks a little bit of hypocrisy. And it's hypocrisy that Jesus talks about very negatively throughout the Scriptures. One of my things that I brought with me from the Methodist Church came from the great revival, the Wesleyan revival in England, 250 years ago. And John Wesley noted that converts to Christianity often ended up and grew in wealth. And some of them would gain almost 100-fold over what they had in a 20-year period. Now, considering the stock market today, that's really a good return. Because think about it. When people stop drinking, when people stop running around and stop carousing, and they started living responsible lives, what did they do? Then, all of that energy that they had put toward having a great old time, it went to making money. So, clean living can do that for you. And Wesley started preaching the principle that has stayed with me for many, 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 many years. Wesley said, earn as much as you can, save as much as you can, and give away as much as you can. And yet, we get to this parable in Luke of a farmer, and Jesus calls him a fool. doesn't call him stupid, not a bad guy. He doesn't call him a bad guy. He just calls him stupid. And remember back to Forrest Gump, if you will. Remember what Forrest Gump said about stupid? Stupid is as stupid does. And again, Jesus said, be careful. Watch out. Be alert. Learn this lesson of a very successful man. Understanding that there is a difference between who we are and what we have is very important. And if we don't understand that difference, if we define ourselves by what's over here in our pile of stuff, we are in deep trouble. So here's the problem of possessions, and we know now what Jesus has said. The solution is watch out, be on guard. What you have does not define you. But we know families will do what over possessions? They will fight. Possessions can tear a family apart. Did you see how this whole thing got started? The first verse in chapter 12. Jesus speaking to a crowd of thousands. They were packed together just like Times Square at midnight on New Year's, or like Fifth Avenue during the Macy's Day Parade on Thanksgiving. They were everywhere. And, you know, they're sitting there just one on top of each other. And if you've never known family turmoil, you are blessed beyond belief. Families fight. And families feud. And those who are blessed with much, you know, they get in just as much trouble as they possibly can fighting. And those who don't have a lot of wealth, the conflicts there are just as bad. And these conflicts can be messy. They can be costly. But my experience over the years has been they can be terribly, terribly painful. So we got to be aware. We've got to be alert. We've got to be careful about our stuff that we own, because my life and your life does not consist of what we have. And so many times it's just fodder. It is just fodder for family fights. And then there's another thing. We've got to be careful about the stuff that we got, because we'll never, ever have enough of it. The more you get, the more you want. And that's just human nature. So possessions are a great problem, and you never have enough of them. And verse 18 told us, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Well, my question is, when is enough? And I'll give you an answer to that. Enough is always just a little bit more than what you got right now. You never have enough. You want to have a little bit more of what you have. Stories out there about an American businessman who went on vacation, and he went someplace like Cabo or someplace down in Mexico. And one day he was walking along a beautiful beach. Up on the beach was a small fishing boat. And on the prow of that boat was a fisherman, about 2/3 asleep. And the fellow walked by, and he walked up to the fisherman, and he said, "What are you doing? Why aren't you fishing?" And the fisherman kind of looked at him, and he said, "Because I fished this morning, and I caught all the fish that my family will need for the day." And the businessman, who was just thinking like a businessman, he says, "But if you went out twice a day, you could catch enough fish that you could sell a few. And when you sold a few, before long, you'd make enough money, you could buy 2 or 3 or 4 boats. And then with a little bit of luck, you could start your own seafood business and start shipping fish north up to the United States." And the fisherman said, "Well, what on earth then? What would happen?" And the business man said, "Well, you'd make millions of dollars. And then you could retire, and you could get a nice place on the beach, And you could sit out here and gaze at the sun and look at the beautiful water. And at that point, the fisherman kind of propped up on his elbow, and he looked at the guy and he said,